Right, that's it.
Daniel, what the hell are you doing?
There is no way I'm giving this twat a single penny of my money.
Don't be ridiculous.
No, why should I? Why should I? He comes in here on the day of our father's funeral, tries to blackmail us, and then he slags off my novel. Who does he think he is?
He has the photos.
Let him show the photos. I don't care.
Daniel!
No, Robert. I give up, okay? I give up. I can't take any more. If that's what he's going to do, then fine, let him do it.
Fine.
Fine.
What? Wait. Please, get out of my way. Let's just discuss this a minute. There is nothing to discuss. Get out of my way. Go.
Hello, listening people. It's me, one of your hosts, Ryan Swinsky.
Oh, Bartek.
Oh, what was that, sorry?
Hello, I'm Bartek.
Thank you. You said it in English. I needed that. I don't speak Polish. Although I am Polish, I don't speak the language.
You know what Polish reminds me of?
What?
Spit and Polish presents Pictures Powwow, the show.
You mean one of the top 10 rated Polish podcasts?
I haven't checked in a while, but I assume we are still at number 4.
Unless there's been a new Polish podcast that's come out, which is very rare. Because a lot of Poland is in a constant state of Lent where they don't podcast.
Yeah.
But there's a few like us who break the rules or live in countries elsewhere.
They're dealing with those 2 topical missiles from a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah, that's your Polish facts. Bartek, how are you doing this fine day?
I'm doing okay.
Yeah. Just fine.
I mean, I'm a little bit sick, but...
Well, Bartek's sick and bloody tired.
But, you know, I don't want to say anything topical.
It's
like, ooh, Bartek's sick in this episode. Does that mean he's always sick because I can always listen to this episode?
Bartek is sick and tired of talking about the podcast when he would rather be doing the podcast. So let's just rip the Band-Aid off. We're doing our series Pictures Powwow, where we talk about a movie that has come recommended. And we have a rhythm, a cycle to the recommendations. What is that, Bartek?
Well, that rhythm or cycle is that we have 3 weeks, and in each week, something different happens. But every 3 weeks, that same thing from that week will happen again. Mm-hmm. What are those things? I'll tell you those things. The things are, in the first week, I, Bartek, pick a film.
That's right.
In the second week, I'll tell you later because that's what we're currently in, and we'll save it for last. And in the third week, it's the listening people. That's right. You, and also the other yous listening to this right now, can recommend us a film in any way you can.
Yeah, we have an email address, we have social medias. You can just drop us a line with a movie that you want us to cover, and we'll add it to the list and get around to it eventually.
So, Ryan, we're in week 2 right now, which I believe, if it's not me, and if it's not them, the yous, it must be you, the you in the room with me, Ryan Slewinski.
Yes, I recommend a movie, and I did recommend a film. The one of discussion for this episode is Death at a Funeral. If you have not seen this British version of it, there's an American one from 2010. This is the 2007 film.
Yeah, the Kevin 07 cut.
And... brought me back. And I just want to say, for those listening people out there who heard the last week's episode, Bartek corrected me and said that it wasn't from 2007 and he thought it was from earlier, and I just want to say I was right.
Well, I didn't correct you, I just thought it was...
You interrupted me with a tone of being like, I think it was earlier, Ryan. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll take your word for it, but I feel, and we'll get into it, but if you've not seen this film, we recommend you give it a watch for yourself, but a brief description of it would go as such. How would you, Bartek, personally pitch Death at a Funeral to somebody who hasn't seen it, but you're wanting to make sure that they would watch it?
So it is a British black comedy film, dark comedy film, that is set entirely during a funeral that is happening on this one day, in which a bunch of friends and family of the deceased, which is an older man who had a wife and 2 grown adult sons. He is the one who has passed away, and so he has, a few generations of family, like, you know, a few people above him, one below him, who all come gather together, and we mostly follow his two sons and his niece and nephew, who are siblings to each other. And they all have their own sort of personal baggage that they bring to the funeral, where, you know, the son has to do the eulogy and he feels like he's in his brother's shadow. The other brother has come from New York and he seems to just be, you know, focused on his own ego. The nephew is like a drug deal that he wants to get to later on. And a couple of hijinks, you know, get carried into the funeral unintentionally. And the niece has her boyfriend, who I don't think has met her father yet.
At least he doesn't approve of him.
Yeah, well, okay, she brings her boyfriend, who's this kind of nervous guy, and, you know, that brings with it its own sort of set of hijinks. So all of these little elements, plus a few other, like, you know, friends and family come together.
And a stranger that the family doesn't know at all.
And a stranger played by Peter Dinklage. They all come together, and all of their sort of eccentricities interrupt or negatively affect the funeral in some way, which ensues hilarity.
And the characters all go on journeys and arcs where they develop and become better.
Yeah.
So watch it for yourself. It's a rather entertaining little film, but we're going to get into what we think about it and our overall history and relationship. And Bartek, I cannot remember off the top of my head. Have you seen this before?
I have. I saw this in the cinema.
Oh, right.
Yes, so I associate this film with, like, the old design of Chadstone Shopping Centre, which is
I remember.
here in Melbourne, so that's where my confusion came in for, like, I think it was a bit older than that, but yeah, it must have been 2007 because that's when the film came out.
And do you have any other recollections about this? Do you remember why you went to go see it? Was this your mum pick, or was this something that was of interest for you? Did you go see it with any other people, friends? What was
I cannot remember who I saw it with. It might have been my stepbrother, or it might have been my mum and my stepbrother. That's likely. I don't think it was any friends that I saw it with. I remember that I didn't know what it was. I just heard that, like, oh, this is a new comedy film that's come out and it should be funny. And I remember very much enjoying it. Whenever someone would mention, I'm like, oh yes, I remember seeing that. I remember it being funny. Didn't remember too much about it. I think whenever I tried to think back on it, it was all stuff regarding Peter Dinklage in that study room. That, like, darkish, reddish room.
Yeah.
So when you recommended it last week, I'm like, oh yes, I remember that being a good time. I don't remember too much about it, so this should be, yeah, a good experience.
So I have a very vivid history with this feature film. So growing up in rural Australia, my hometown specifically did have a cinema. It was it was a small cinema. They would only play one movie. There was no multiple choices. It was, okay, this is the movie. We're going to play this until we get the next movie. So it wasn't
not even a cycle of, like, this day? Okay.
No.
Wow.
So if you wanted to see The King's Speech when it came out, the bandbox theater is what we called it, what it was called, it would only play The King's Speech for a couple of weeks, and then it would move on to the next thing. And so that meant that we didn't get a lot of movies. And so I was in a neighboring town, a more developed town, more of I guess, verging on a minor little city. I can't remember what those are called. Is there a name for that when it's a town where it's developed enough, but it's not a city yet? I feel like there's a name for that transitionary point where it hasn't developed to a large enough status for a city, but it isn't a town. I don't know.
What's a township? Is that different from a town?
I'm not. See, people, email us at spitandpolished@gmail.com to give us these town-related answers. But Port Macquarie, I was there. My dad was working at a job there, and so we're waiting to pick him up from work. And I remember the cinema there had a big poster of Death at a Funeral, and it was a poster where we are in the ground and they're looking down at us. So all of the characters that are featured in the film. And I recognized so many of the cast members. I had not heard a single thing about this film. I knew nothing other than the title, some of the cast, and the director, Frank Oz. I love Frank Oz films. I am a big fan of Little Shop of Horrors, which he directed. I'm also a big fan of What About Bob, which is a rather interesting little film with Bill Murray, and has nightmarish behind the scenes stuff behind it. But it's a really entertaining film for me. And Bowfinger is, I think, probably one of Eddie Murphy's greatest films, and one of the most overlooked, not, well, I wouldn't say, but is definitely an overlooked Steve Martin film. Let's just say that. I don't know if you've ever even heard of Bowfinger, but
I'm not sure.
what I'll say is you would love it.
Okay.
So Frank Oz is a name that really sticks because also we all know him from the Muppets, and he does voice work and he's Yoda, but I always associate Frank Oz for his direction. Little Shop of Horrors is a real mainstay in my household.
I was about
as
to
a
say,
kid.
2 days before we did our Mouse Hunt episode and you recommended this film, you showed me Little Shop of Horrors. Now I'm starting to wonder, like, coincidence?
I think partially yes, but because like I said at the end of the last episode, Mouse Hunt just sparked, like, I feel like these pair well together while they're not the exact same. I feel like you could have a good night watching these films. But I eventually got to see it. We had to wait because it was one of those things where the poster was at the cinema, but they weren't showing the movie yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then we eventually saw it in a different town altogether.
So a third town.
Yes, and it was the same town where I saw The Incredibles at when I was younger. And I remember very vividly my experience with The Incredibles film is I think it's the worst cinema going experience I've ever had in my entire life. Stinking hot summer. The cinema is basically in a little town hall. So you do have like big wooden doors at the side of the cinema where you can see the sunlight beaming through like underneath. So you are getting the projection fucked with. And it was filled with like little kids. So little kids who are hot and stuck in a big room want to run around and do shit. And so I saw The Incredibles there, and I always remember my parents swearing off going to that cinema. But we did go for Death at a Funeral, and we had a marvelous time. Again, knew nothing about it. I had never looked anything up. I just remembered the title, the image of the poster, and some of the actors in it. So that was it. Bam, off to the races. And then eventually I bought it on DVD, and we've watched it many a times over the years. So it's been a little while since I have actually watched Death at a Funeral, so I was keen on giving it a revisit, and I thought, hey, why not do it for the pod? We've had a couple of serious movies as of late, and then you gave us Mouse Hunt, so I was like, let's kind of lean into some more sillier fare.
Yeah.
So how was it on this watch for you?
Yeah, 15 years later, watching it for a second time, I had a good time with it. There had some very nice laughs, some very fun character stuff going on. And even the opening credits and the ending credits had like some actual like fun little things going on that was really enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We discussed that in an episode recently, didn't we? Where it was about was it about Mouse Hunt? I can't remember. Where we talked about opening credits and like how they're fun. Oh, it was the City Slickers.
Yeah.
City Slickers. I thought about that when I was watching. I was like, oh yeah, they don't. The credits are telling a story.
We've done maybe I'm forgetting some of them, but two that come off the top of my head. Films that have a sort of similar setup. They're not about funerals, but weddings. So we've done The Wedding Date before, and we did Love, Wedding, Repeat, where both those films kind of had a similar setup to this one, where it's about an event where all the family and friends are going to gather. And you've got like the kooky characters that come in. You got some serious ones. Both of them are, British films, so there's like this like British air to them. You usually have like the one slimy character that comes in who's like not taking it seriously and is a bit antagonistic.
Drugs,
yeah, like all these like little like, oh, how embarrassing if that were to happen in real life things going on. So it was very similar setup to that one. And this one does also have romance elements, but like
not as strongly.
Not as strongly. No,
that's not really a focus.
Like the niece character,
right?
Pretty much, yeah.
There's even connections. Put a pin in Love, Wedding, Repeat for now. We'll get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Wedding Date. The father of I think it was like
the niece and the nephew, right?
In The Wedding Date, they were in this movie. So
I was looking up the cast on Wikipedia after I watched the film, and I think like the stern, disapproving
yes.
father was like the stepdad in that film.
Yes. So to clarify, the stern father in Death at a Funeral, the one who's the doctor as well,
Hmm.
he was in The Wedding Date, and he plays a very similar type of, I'm stern, Britishy folk, and you have to,
It's
not as stern, but like, what I mean.
in a few months. I think it'll be like 7 years since we've done that episode, so I can't quite remember. But was he my favorite character in
Yes,
that?
I'm pretty sure. My favorite
Yeah.
character was actually the groom in that movie, who was played by Jack Davenport, the Captain Norrington from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. But yeah, there are some connective tissues here. For myself, I very much enjoyed it. I thought it held up quite well. There are some issues I have with the movie, and some things that I don't find funny now as an adult, but I remembered finding very funny when I was a teenager. So it is great to actually be able to document that kind of growth, or that kind of difference of opinions of things. So to just touch on it, growing up, as a teen, the Alan Tudyk side of the story, the boyfriend who gets high on drugs and does all of the crazy stuff, that was always a standout for me. I remember finding that very funny, and I love that performance. It's very over the top. And this time around watching it, there was only maybe one or two moments that gained a laugh from me from that, and it was actually the part of the film I surprisingly cared the least about on this particular watch. Everything else I was more drawn to. So that was a surprise to myself, because I also love that actor, Alan Tudyk. He was one of the reasons I saw this film in the first place. And it was very amusing to read on the IMDb trivia about how he's doing a British accent in the movie, because I couldn't tell you if he was. I didn't hear a slight tinge of a British accent coming from him. So fail, I guess. I guess just quickly to bat that to you. Did you note that down? Like, was that something like? Did you think he was British? I never even considered it.
I wasn't really looking out for like, oh, who are fake Brits in this film, so I wasn't really paying.
The only
close
two
attention.
Americans are him and Peter Dinklage.
Mm.
So Peter Dinklage has his American accent.
Yeah, he was the only one that stood out. Yeah,
Alan Tudyk apparently is doing a British accent, but it doesn't sound
Well,
British to me.
well,
Like,
in
I
the
didn't
trivia-
even consider it.
Well, in the trivia, it kept talking about how he's from Texas. I certainly didn't hear a Texan accent.
I know what Alan Tudyk sounds like, so he didn't sound that different to me. You've he was Pirate Steve in Dodgeball. So he's been in everything. Alan Tudyk, you've seen him in something or heard.
I know
him in
that I
something.
looked up his filmography, and there were a couple of things. Yeah,
But so to get into, I guess, things that may not have worked, or things that didn't land, or just didn't hit as funny this time around. Were there any things like that for you? Because again, this is your second time viewing it. It's been 15 years, as you said, so your tastes have changed. So
I can't really speak to that first experience because I really don't remember much outside of like the Peter Dinklage stuff. But to jump on your point with the Alan Tudyk stuff, it was definitely one of the plots in the film that I felt like not necessarily wasn't funny, but like had like pacing or rhythm issues with it. So obviously part of the comedy is that he is, very high on acid, and he's doing silly stuff. And, I found it all funny. Like, when he's playing with the like lawn chicken thing,
toilet paper,
things like that. And like all these little moments, like they were funny. There were moments where, he was being stopped by his girlfriend. Those were funny. But a lot of them did kind of drag on a little bit, and he had occasional moments of relative clarity, which I felt
was convenient.
Convenient. Like when they were sitting him down and saying like, okay, don't freak out, but you are high on acid, and like he was, yelling at the brother about it.
Well, admittedly, they did have to take 20 minutes to help him get his sight and hearing back for him to hear that information.
Yes, that's true. But in that moment, it felt like, oh, okay, they've actually managed to get him a moment of clarity. So maybe from this point on, his experience will be a bit more of a personal struggle where like he's trying to keep clarity. But then after that, he runs to the toilet, and it feels like like 5 times they cut back and it's still just him inside doing something weird, making noises, and his girlfriend is just sitting outside, and it's like, okay, can this develop already? And eventually
It does.
Eventually we're like, oh, he's stepping outside the window, he's naked. It's like, okay, we can finally keep going with this plot. It's not just, repeating the same thing.
I want to thank the film and the writers for also avoiding the trope of person high on acid, which is they go up on a high thing and think they can fly. I almost was expecting that to happen, but that does not happen. He gets up there, but he's sound of mind enough not to, because that's an age-old tired thing that we hear all the time with this, but he threatens jumping because of
he
reasons.
straight up acknowledges that, like, if I jump, I'm gonna die, and that's the threat.
Yeah, so I just want to commend them. I totally agree with you with those statements that you said about how it can be a bit stopping and starting, but I did find myself having moments of amusement, mainly when it was him interacting with the funeral service itself. That's its problem, is a lot of his being high humor. No, here's the real truth of it. When you see the initial pitch of this happen, where she gives him the Valium, we know it isn't Valium, and yet you go, oh, okay. Oh, I can't wait to see the movie develop where this guy's high as fuck at the funeral. And you get that for maybe just like 2 scenes, really. And then the rest of the time it's either before the funeral or when the funeral is already on pause because of his actions and he's up in the toilet and then he's up on the roof, and then by the time he comes back down to the funeral to interact with anyone else, he's more leveled now. So that was a part of my disappointment. Was I would have liked a lot more moments of hijinks or whimsy or him being high humor.
Pair him up with like the rest of the ensemble for a scene.
Yeah, or have more scenes dedicated to the weird little things that happens at funerals, a weird small talk you make before a service starts. Or I would have loved to, and this is something the film directly avoids, which is I would have loved for him to talk to like the funeral director, which doesn't exist in this movie. It's like the chapel, it's reverend. We have the funeral people at the beginning, they dump them off and then they just go, which it's not really how it works. But I would have loved, like, when you go to a funeral, I mean, we've both been to funerals, there's just little things that are that happen at them that I would have loved to have seen be implemented into this movie, and you shove Alan Tudyk's character into those so that there's more social awkward faux pas. Because what really drew me to the comedy of this was not the Alan Tudyk gurning and being over-the-top physical comedy, but what it was that British matter-of-fact comedy of errors, trying to be mannered whilst everything is falling apart. So imagine throwing Alan Tudyk's character into that more often. But like you say, they isolate him upstairs, and then eventually he goes out onto the roof, and then eventually everyone notices. And even that, I wish there was more comedy played with all the people down there noticing this naked man, but that is mainly there to serve as distraction so that the other plot can do what it needs to do.
Yeah, even the fact that he's put upstairs, like, it even isolates the possibility of like him interacting with Uncle Alfie at that point, because he even mentions like, oh, I can't go up the stairs. So yeah, it's now that we're talking about it, yeah, there's a lot of things going on with that subplot, which I can see why it wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, Alan Tudyk's wonderful though. He really dedicates it. I would have also preferred a little bit more of time or understanding of Alan Tudyk's character before he got high. There were just some statements that the dad made, or the Ewan Brennan character, the sleazy guy who's trying to hit on her, who's Spud from Trainspotting, and we remember him, of course, from Around the World in 80 Days. He was the sleazy police inspector guy that was chasing after them a lot.
Yeah, there was someone like that.
We really loved him in that movie.
Yeah,
He got a lot of slapstick thrown his way. He was like a tall, skinny guy.
He looked familiar, but I couldn't.
He's in a million things as well. You've seen or heard him in a lot, but. Yeah, there was just moments where I was like, they're telling me about this Alan Tudyk character, but I don't know who he is. All I know is this version of him that's high. I think that if we got to know a little more, had a little more before he got high, the truth. Okay, did you actually feel much sympathy for his plight as a person, or did you just see it as a comic thing that happened? Because for myself, I didn't really feel much plight for him. I just looked at it as a thing to laugh at.
I did feel, some sympathy for his plight because the way he's introduced, he had a very nervous. I was going to say nervous energy to it, but almost like
Disposition.
nervous meekness to him, really.
Mm.
And it's very clear that this is a character who has things that need to be overcome, which we later learn. It's like, okay, the father's disapproving of him. I'm forgetting a lot of the details from that early part of the film, but I do remember that this was a character that's like, there's plenty of narrative possibilities for this character in like a dark comedy that has very comedy of error things going on. So the fact that, yeah, he is very much not sound of mind for most of the film means that, you close a lot of doors to make way for a couple.
Now, another thing that didn't land for me on this particular viewing, and this is a very specific criticism. This is something that I even have a hard time grasping, but I just know this is true for myself, is with him and a couple of others, again, the Ewan Bremner character, and what was the friend's name who's the hypochondriac? Charlie? Charles. But
The guy who like had to help Uncle Alfie.
yes.
Yeah.
I think those characters in particular, what they did for me that detracted was, and it's not even necessarily the actors, but yes, and the actors in part, but the characters were definitely played as the comedy, like this is a comedy.
Mm.
Ha, laugh, this is wacky. There was a definite energy or presentation of this is funny. You see him, he's grinning rictuously while walking towards him. And I'm not saying that these things are not funny. What my complaint is, they stood out as overtly like we are being funny with these, but while the rest of the cast and the rest of the characters and the rest of the movie, the humor actually comes a lot from how seriously people are playing it.
Yeah, that British element kind of thing.
And Peter Dinklage is one of the funniest performances in the movie because he's playing it like it's a drama. There's no real wink to the camera about the absurdity that is his what his story goes through. He plays it like this is a real solid dramatic story, and so does our lead Matthew McFadden, who was Mr. Darcy in the Pride and Prejudice movie. He is saddled with some amazingly funny moments, but that character in that performance is never portraying it like he's in a comedy.
Yeah, he's completely straight pretty much the whole film.
Same with his brother. His brother could easily be that, but that actor and that character overall is, even though they have funny lines and funny observations and reactions, like Dad was a gay, like, it's still played as if this is a real thing that's happening for these characters. It's not like a wink. And with a lot of comedies that can work. Like, I like a Will Ferrell movie from time to time. I like Walk Hard and stuff like that, where they're playing it up like it's a comedy. And that there's a time and a place for that. Like the Naked Gun movies. Wonderful examples where Leslie Nielsen plays it super straight, but at the same time you know that there's a wink in there, like, you know what I'm doing. We know what we're doing here. This is all funny, but Death at Funeral too is riding the line of being hilariously over the top and absurd, and actually being sentimental at times, being genuine and sweet. And for me, there were just a couple of those characters that I looked at and just went, "You are here just to be funny people."
I felt that a lot when that friend, the hypochondriac, sat down next to the widow, like on that bench, and like he was telling a story about
a guy got stabbed in the neck.
A guy getting stabbed in the neck, and like when he was like describing where specifically he got stabbed, it's like, okay, this is pushing it a little bit.
And what about the sleazy guy? Like, that character is completely useless. The one that's trying to hit on And was she the niece, right?
Yeah, the niece. Yeah.
What did you think of him? Because he's in a lot of the movie. He just keeps popping in. Like whenever the movie's got something happening, it would just cut to him doing that.
It's hard for me to remember that Love Wedding Repeat movie, like the little details of, but I swear there was like an identical character in that film, and it just felt like, okay, this is what you need to have one of these in this type of like family gathering film, because you got to have the one like outsider who doesn't want to be there, who's not invested, but
they have their own sick agenda.
Yeah, their own sick agenda. It really doesn't amount to much. Like, most of his scenes, like, with the niece, the person that he's lusting over, is just him getting blown off. Like,
there's no development in the gag.
Yeah, even when he does, like, do the bad thing and, like, start making out with her, it's, like, immediately interrupted by, like, him being freaked out. They're like, oh, shit, her boyfriend's naked. And, the boyfriend freaks out, but his girlfriend, the niece, just immediately blows off like, no, I wasn't kissing him, and the movie just moves on from there.
There's no development of the comedy that could come from this idea. It's once you know what it is, it just is that. There's no surprises like there is in the rest of the film with the rest of the storylines. And so you look at it and go, meh. Meh.
And they even established, like, because he's like the best friend of the hypochondriac for whatever reason, and there was that.
No. That's a great criticism. For whatever reason, I have no clue why they know each other or why they're friends.
For some reason, it didn't register to me until I said for whatever reason. But you're right. But they established like that. He screwed him over at one point because he didn't help him like push Uncle Alfie up the hill. So you could have maybe played on that dynamic a bit more, where like he is with his friend for most of it, and he needs to be relied on for something, but he just keeps blowing him off because a woman's nearby or whatever.
That would have been wonderful. You kind of get that with the brother, the rich brother at times. Like, oh, I could help, but oh look, she's young and fit now, huh? And he goes off to talk to that girl. It was a surprisingly low-cut dress for a funeral, by the way. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, we wouldn't
one of
wear
those. Yeah, those are just some of the criticisms I have. Another one, just to throw it out there, because I actually don't have too many. There's little things that may pop up as we keep talking about it. But another one was I don't really care for the ending. I like the scene where Matthew McFadden's just sitting on the couch and like just, oh my God. And then, his wife comes in and he puts his legs on her and they have a discussion with the brother and all. I love that. But then it's just like, oh, and Uncle Alfie is now on the roof naked and high, and that's the end of the movie. I'm like, yeah, but what about Peter Dinklage? Like, my brain cannot get over what happened to Peter. What happened to Peter Dinklage?
Like,
what did they do with Peter Dinklage?
Pretty much as soon as our main character like does his eulogy,
they tried to kill him.
Yeah, as soon as our main character does the eulogy, like Peter Dinklage is irrelevant.
Yes, which is unfortunate because he's really good. But that is my main dirty laundry that I have to throw at Death at a Funeral. I want to say that I very much had a great time. Now, I want to...
Even those negative things, they weren't like offensively bad. It was just like,
not at all.
They just didn't work. That was really odd.
Those are things that, I would want to tidy up a bit, but they were just things, and again, these have been things that have entertained me in previous watches. So it's just about having had watched this a few times, and you know what it's like when you rewatch a thing a few times. There are things that used to excite you that no longer do, and now other things within the material draw your attention.
And, with 3 years, Chris Rock had plenty of time to fix these issues.
Oh,
I'm sure.
Chris Rock and his amazing version where Peter Dinklage is in it as well as the same character. But, we'll talk about it.
You'll have to tell me about it because I haven't seen it.
Chris Rock's version. Now, talk to us all about some of the positive experiences you had. Any particular moments that stood out, or characters, or storylines, stuff like that.
Probably not too surprising, but Uncle Alfie is a type of comedy character that is just right up my alley.
I knew it. I fucking knew it.
It's like, let's not even beat about the bush. Like, obviously, this was a character that like really tickled it for me. It was just very cranky, and then they had that one moment with, was it the slimy best friend character where like he was like, oh, women problems? Was that something?
Yes.
Yeah, with him, it's like, women problems. Uncle Alfie like breaks his like grumpy exterior to tell like a story.
You think he's going to be going like
Yeah.
somewhere to help this
And,
character
yeah.
have an arc?
And like there were a few things he said in it that were really funny. It's like, oh, when she walked into the room, everyone wanted to fuck her, and it's like, ooh, saucy there, and then it just gets interrupted by, oh, I need to go take a shit,
And then now that story develops.
and that
The shit story develops.
and that is it for those two characters' dynamic for the film because
They never interact
He
again.
never interacted. He doesn't really interact with anyone else, really, other than the select few leads.
Yeah. I knew you would be an Alfie fan. I just
Yeah.
knew that actor, really great. He was in Game of Thrones, and there's a few other people in this were in Game of Thrones because, of course, they were. They're
I think
British.
I read that was his last role, Game of Thrones.
Yeah. He was up there. But Alfie's wonderful. I mean, I'm a sucker for a good poo gag like anyone else, and that sequence there is disgusting. But I adore how it is constructed visually, and just the music dropping out, and just all of it is just masterfully crafted from the behind the camera of it all.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of like poo comedy, but it worked for this film because it had to happen to that character of all characters.
It did.
The hypochondriac.
It really did have to happen to him.
And like the sudden spike of agitation as soon as he realizes there's a bit on his face too. Yeah.
My favorite character was actually our lead character, the son who is all anxious about giving the eulogy and his legacy and being a writer, and his girlfriend was his wife or girlfriend.
Wife.
Wife.
Their wife, yeah.
Yeah, wife wanting to get an apartment, and I really found him to be the one that drew me in, specifically the moment where he decides that he's not going to pay Peter Dinklage. I thought that was a very strong performance from the actor, and I totally agreed with the character. And there was humor to be had there as well, where he very, very sternly and very, again, this is said with absolute sincerity, and I mean this as a positive, Britishness in his voice, where he said, like, I was okay with it before, but then, he comes to my father's funeral, blah, 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 and he insults my writing in front of my face. I can't abide by that. And you're like, yeah, I just found him and a lot of his reactions to be hilarious because they were very realistic reactions. And I had a particular laugh out loud moment where when he's realizing all the gay paraphernalia in the house, but then Peter Dinklage is noticing that he's noticing stuff, and then Peter Dinklage starts looking around, and then he's also going on this journey as well. Like, we get, like, just from Peter Dinklage's face, that Peter Dinklage is also like, oh yeah, there's a lot of gay stuff here. Huh?
Both of them had some very good eye acting, yeah.
Very much. And yeah, Matthew McFadyen, he's a really great actor. You can just tell that. He's like, a thing to praise about Death at a Funeral is, yes, there's funny actors here, like comedic actors here, but this is very much made up of non-comedians, and I think it adds to the film overall. What do you think about that? Because you look over this cast, and a lot of them aren't like comedy people. Like when you hear Death at a Funeral and it's like a British comedy, there may be some certain names you would expect to pop up, or just certain kind of actors, but this doesn't really make up of that.
For me, I didn't really, other than Peter Dinklage, I didn't really know anyone by name, I don't think. Certainly when I looked them up afterwards just to make sure I had seen them in something, like a couple of them I'd technically seen in something but not remembered. I think the hypochondriac best friend was like a prison guard in some movie. I think it might have been a superhero film or something. It's like, oh, okay, I'll take their word for it. I think it might have been The Last Jedi.
Okay.
I think he was apparently in that, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the fact that I didn't really recognize anyone played to that, where I didn't really know what to expect from these people. If it was like a, star-studded cast of like British actors and actresses, maybe then my expectations would have been something.
Like this doesn't have Hugh Grant in it, which you can easily imagine the Hugh Grant version of this.
Or Rowan Atkinson as the second, priest running it.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you can definitely see that they make a valiant attempt not to fall into the Four Weddings and a Funeral style comedy.
Yeah, we were listing actors from that, weren't we?
Yeah. But there's lots of well-known, like, or at least good British character acting people here, as well as, like I said, some. This is the first thing I knew Peter Dinklage from. This was what introduced me.
It must have been for me too.
Not Elf.
I definitely saw Elf, but I can't say I remember him in it.
You really don't? He was the boss.
Oh, he was. Yes, that's right. Because Will Ferrell's like tall elf guy, and he had a short. So that was Peter Dinklage.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
That was Dink. That was the Dinklage. Yeah. So
I have to rewatch that film.
They
now.
came out around same year, probably, right, or near each other.
Wasn't that 2001?
What, Elf?
Wasn't that like early 2000s?
Were you saying Will Ferrell did Elf and Zoolander at the same time? Because let's never forget when Zoolander came out.
Apparently, I have trouble listing Peter Dinklage films in the 2000s.
2003.
2003. Okay.
So a couple of years after Zoolander.
If we average our guesses,
because I was going to say for international people like you and me, and young when Zoolander came out, that's the first thing I ever saw Will Ferrell in.
Must have been for me too.
He was still an SNL guy back then.
Oh, you would have seen him in Austin Powers, right?
Oh yeah, but I probably didn't recognize him because he was in brownface. Yeah. So
Elf would have been the first one for me though.
When did you see Zoolander?
Oh, later down the line. It might have been like late 2000s, early 2010s.
I'm so sorry.
Late
you missed
2000s
out on all the
probably.
fun. But what were some funny moments for you? Moments that made you laugh, or you just were even surprised by?
Anti-surprise. It was expected, but I enjoyed the running gag of like whenever anyone would see the photograph, and they'd all have like a similar reaction of like, "Oh God!"
That was very good.
that was always fun. Again, I expected it every time, but it still worked because it was a different character every time. So yeah.
And I, as somebody rewatching it, get a real joy out of all of the foreshadowing about the father's sexuality, all of the breadcrumbs that are strewn throughout the film, like the passage that the Reverend was reading from the Bible.
I think a lot of the foreshadowing went over my head.
So the Reverend, if you go back, he reads from the King.
It's a letter.
King James Bible, right? Or he reads this certain passage about these two guys fighting and then stripping off all of their clothes, and and he ends it. He ends because he reads this exact passage from this part to this part, not the full thing.
See, I remember.
And he's like, the dad really loved this, and it was like right down to the bit where they physically embraced each other naked, and that's where he ends it.
See, I remember the dad was gay, but I wasn't paying attention to that because we had funny Alan Tudyk stuff going on.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So that's why a rewatch thing, when there's other things like you see on the walls and like the areas that they're in, all of the pictures in the frames are of like nude men and stuff. That's not even just in his study, that's just throughout the house. And you do see like books, certain types of books around, and just certain comments people are making throughout the movie, even before the reveal of just like the dad was like, this man. Or even when we get to hear the son's original eulogy, he even mentions that his dad had a childhood friend, like his good male friend that he would spend all of his nights with, Bob and all of that. And so you get a lot of these things just sprinkled throughout. So yeah.
I definitely caught like the Peter Dinklage saying like, did he ever mention me kind of thing? It's a bit more overt. Another character that I really liked was the priest.
I imagined, yeah.
He was up there for me a lot. Yeah, he is trying to keep it together every time.
He's trying to be really understanding.
Every time a delay is requested, he gives like a very enthusiastic, like, of course. But then in like his own moments, he's like, I have to be here till 3. And it's like checking the time. It's like... And then, obviously, the payoff there is, like, when they're finally redoing the beginning of the funeral and the eulogy, he's just, like, rushing through it.
Yep, he's rushing through that. The standout for me is when he hears when he's getting distracted from the hypochondriac friend, and he's really like,
I was about to say,
I need to phone the police. That young man up there is going to throw himself off the roof. And then he gets the big wowzer moment from the hypochondriac friend, which is, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, the hypochondriac friend is trying to distract the priest from going into the study because that's where all of the like, oh, what are we going to do with the dead bodies stuff is happening. And so the hypochondriac friend is very much struggling to, justify keeping the priest still in the hallway. He's coming up with like all these things like, oh, I want to, priesthood, or what do you think of God? Like very piss-weak things. But then eventually...
I hear on Sundays that wine is sweeter.
Is that true? Yeah. And then eventually he's like, I have to make a confession. I want to like shove a pen up my bum. And the priest's like, what? Unfortunately, he cuts away from that. I would have liked to see.
Oh, I like that
but
reaction.
it was funny.
That was good.
Because when we do cut back, the priest is done. And it's like, oh, well.
What did you think of the older brother?
The older
rich
brother? His performance was good, but I felt like he was mostly a device for the main character's like insecurities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird though because he gets very into it though. Like I can see what you're saying, but what I liked about him too was there were moments of subversion with him where there's like this, we can't rely on him, he's such a flake, like look what he did. But then, hey brother, help me with this dead body. Yeah, of course. Like, right in there. Like here's the photo of dad. Like, okay, well let's deal with this man.
When things get serious, it's good that he doesn't just, he's not like the
roadblock.
Yeah, he's not like the asshole best friend character who's like, yeah, I don't care about this.
Yeah,
he's actually invested in like his father's like, saving his father's face and all that.
What I liked about him was he did have a brand of comedy that I rather liked, which is, say, you can see there's the American version of this, which, exists, and he's not in this, but say there's another universe where the American version is this older brother character is Ryan Reynolds. And the type of, like, snarky, asshole, haha comments that he would make. What I really like about the British sensibilities here and that specific actor is he does have those snarky remarks. He does have these pithy statements to make, but they don't feel so... Guys, it's a comedy movie. It just feels like a real person who has that edge to them. But when push comes to shove, he has to be sensible as well. And so... what I liked about him was, yes, I can see what you're saying. He's a device for the main character's insecurity, but at the same time, it's not like he's walking up on purposely nudging the main character to be insecure. It's just his existence and his ideological difference to his brother.
He's not like an active antagonist. It's like, oh, so how's your shit book going, huh? Oh, it's so really great up here in #1 bestseller land. And
he's not even bragging about his own wealth. When he does talk about his wealth, it's from this absolute place of obliviousness, and so that's what makes him frustrating.
And I really enjoyed that little gag or joke where it's like, oh, money's a bit tight, I can get it to you in a few months. Do you know how expensive first class is? And it doesn't get called out there. Later on in the film, like when they're having their argument moment, the main character does bring up like, why are you flying first class?
Knowing that you're going to have to pay for half the funeral.
At that point, calling it out is appropriate because that's the type of scene it was in. They didn't have... It wasn't part of like the gag itself, which I appreciated.
Yeah, and... Yeah, I appreciated him. I like Rupert Graves as an actor. He's wonderful in the television series of Sherlock as Lestrade. He plays Lestrade.
Is that a detective?
Yeah, he's the chief of police, usually, or chief inspector. But he's wonderful as an actor. He's a silver fox, so it's always weird to see him in this where he's young and he has long black hair. He's a real...
Okay. Does he become, like, later in his career Silver Fox, or was he at this point Silver Fox?
I want to say... Sherlock was like a year later, so I think he was already like this at this point. I'm assuming that this is a wig, or like I've never seen him with long hair either outside of this. So
I wouldn't have guessed.
No, I mean this is also probably one of the first things I saw him in. So this is what I took him as, and I remember years into watching Sherlock finding out that he was the guy from Death at a Funeral because he looks so different and he acts very differently too.
He's a chameleon, it sounds like.
Yes, but very handsome, very handsome.
Yeah, he's handsome, sure.
Can we talk about Peter Dinklage?
No, we can.
What do you think about Peter Dinklage in this film and what his character is?
Like you said earlier, he's playing it very straight, very much like a drama, and I really, really enjoyed that. Like every single time, like he approaches our main character, before, and he's getting blown off. He, much like the priest, is very understanding. It's like, of course, we can do it later. I mentioned the eye acting before. Like there are so many moments where just like his face, it's like a little bit mopey, just says a lot. I remember the moment where like he says the line that's really cluing in our main character, like, oh, it was a gay affair. Like he had this look of like, yeah, that's it. And I really enjoyed that. I thought he was doing a lot of really great, like you said, dramatic acting, which led itself to, a lot of comedy.
Other thing I really want to thank the film for, and I think this is what makes it age particularly well, is there's not a lot of derogatory humor made from the Peter Dinklage side, whether it is him being gay or being a dwarf. Now, there are jokes that refer to these things, but they aren't themselves bigoted or negative things. So, for instance, there is a joke about Peter Dinklage's height made in the movie about, like, how you think people won't notice him? Like, he's like 4 feet tall. Like, everyone's gonna... And the fact that
they were just pointing out the fact that he stands out.
Yeah, and the fact that they can fit him in the coffin. And so there are things like that, but it never is, ha, he's a dwarf, ha, isn't it funny that the dad was in a relationship with a gay dwarf? Like, it's not got that attitude behind it at all, but it reminds me very strongly of the television series It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where they have Danny DeVito in that show. You know this.
Yeah, you told me this.
And rarely ever do they make jokes about him being short or little person. There are references to it. There are occasional gags about it, but it isn't the defining thing. And we see that often be the case when there are actors who are little people or dwarfs. And so that's what elf. That's why Peter Dinklage is an elf, because he's a little person. And wouldn't it be funny if tall Will Ferrell thinks he's an elf? And he gets upset about that. And so that's all he exists for in that movie. Like, could you tell me anything else you remember about that character, an elf? No. That's it.
I had to be reminded of the film itself, yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. And so I appreciate that. And with the gay stuff as well, like, they're not bigoted towards him for being gay. They're annoyed by him for having to blackmail them.
There's barely any...
It's all...
Any reference to, like, oh, he's gay. It's more that the dad was gay.
Yes, the dad was gay. And even when they find out the dad was gay, it's more like, oh, dad was gay? The sons accept it, and they think it's like, it's more of a surprise, but the fear comes from the other people finding out, the social...
because he's married, and this was a secret he
and it would
kept.
upset the mother.
Yeah, and there's photographs.
And there's pornographic photographs. So that is where a lot of the fear comes from. And even then, by the end of the movie, they handle it really wonderfully. It's even this wonderful monologue, the eulogy that the son ends up giving about how his dad was this flawed person, and there were things that he put away for himself, but like, here's what he really was. And so any of the stigma that the comedy could have easily have had by having the mother look at the gay photos and beat up Peter Dinklage, or his brother reacting to it like, oh, and his stern, very, stiff upper lip brother could have been like, oh, my brother. But they really deflate all of the stigma that you could easily have put into this.
I was going to say they didn't do this thing, but technically they did. They didn't bury the gay.
Oh, they tried to.
They tried to bury 2 gays, but they only buried 1.
Gays. There is that great gag, though, where they put him in the 69 position in the coffin. It's like, a part of me thinks this is what Dad would have wanted. Which, again, that was a brother. He had a great...
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, that was a great one.
And he strokes the dad's head while saying it, like, tenderly, like, I love you, Dad.
It's like, in a weird way, I think this is what Dad would have wanted. And the brother gets so upset.
This is what I always think of Peter Dinklage for. I think of Peter Dinklage for Death at a Funeral. What is your relationship with Peter Dinklage as a performer? Have you seen him in much? Aware of him?
That's the thing. I haven't really seen him in much. I'm only really aware of him because he became such a big thing thanks to Game of Thrones. So, and I haven't watched any Game of Thrones. I made a joke about watching it yesterday, but that wasn't serious, guys. That wasn't serious.
He's being a lol.
I was being a lol, and I think. Oh, no, we'll talk it seriously.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. So he's a face that I recognize. It's like, oh, he becomes famous because of this thing I haven't seen. But myself, I haven't seen him in too much. This is what comes to mind. Elf will now come to mind. And I can't really think of anything else.
Oh, he's a voice in the Destiny game.
Yeah, I'm aware
Never
of
played
that. But they got rid of him, and I think
yeah.
brought him back. I know that he. Simply because I'm a Your Movie Sucks fan, he was like, they did a
Tiptoes.
Tiptoes, was that the name of the film?
Yes, the
Where he's
dwarf movie where Gary Oldman plays a dwarf who's just on his knees while Peter Dinklage is fucking standing right there, who should be the lead. Yeah, it's he's had a very interesting and great career overall. I think it's fair to say that he's one of the most successful, well-known, and celebrated actors who's a little person. He's very much, and I'm not saying that this is always the case, but he's very much an actor where he can play roles where it doesn't come up or matter that he's a dwarf. Like, that is often something that does not happen. He often is labeled with that. Like, I really loved him in X-Men Days of Future Past, where he plays the villain in that. He plays...
Okay.
And it's never mentioned that he's a dwarf, but there's a dramatic irony because he's anti-mutants. He's anti people who are other or different or not genetically pure. Mm-hmm. And it's like do you not see the irony to your statement? But like, they never say it, and he's so good in that movie because he plays it like how he does here in Death at a Funeral, this is what I took away. I've watched 6 seasons of Game of Thrones, and what I got from Death at a Funeral really gave me more of an understanding of Peter Dinklage's acting ability, which is he is very expressive with that face. The key to his success as an actor is how emotive those eyes and that face is.
I was going to say earlier, his first shot where maybe it was the first or second, when he's like looking, he's in the distance, he's looking at the main character's like looking around the corner, his wife comes in, it's like, hey, what's going on? It's like, do you see that guy over there looking at me? Mm-hmm. And like they weren't really pointing out at all that like, oh, he's a short person. They were just pointing out like that he's staring at me, and he really did stand out. And you can see, if you're looking at him throughout the scene, like his eyes are just focused on the direction of the main character. So it's very clear that, yeah, he is staring at him.
And Peter Dinklage in Game of Thrones is truly spectacular, and he gets a really well-written character. But
what's his character's name in that?
Tyrion.
Tyrion.
And a part of the success of that performance is not just his wonderful ability to deliver lines, but just the way he carries himself and the looks and the expressions. And he is a very good actor, and I'm glad that he has had major success and that he's continuing to be a voice and an artistic presence, because I think he is wonderful, and I will always think of him for Death at a Funeral, where the writing of this could be dropped, where is it time to talk about the American version, or do you want to talk more about things within this? Is there any other moments or things or sequences that you want to tap into before we divert away?
I'm good either way. Do you have anything more?
I'm trying to think.
We haven't talked about the nephew at all. Did we like him?
He was fine.
I thought it was right.
I think he did a great job of playing off being funny without it being winking.
I like that he traveled between a lot of the stories a lot.
Yeah. He's
if we could have had like something like that for the slimy friend or something, that would have been
wonderful. So in 2010, Chris Rock made an American version of this, and It's very bad.
So you've seen it.
Kevin Hart is the guy at the beginning who drops off the coffin.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember how the guy who drops off the coffin at the beginning of this movie barely spoke, and his comedic presence was from the minimal amount of things he said, but they were the juxtaposition of very prim, proper, like he's bowing his head in respect, and it's like, who's this? And it's like, oh shit, we've got the wrong one, and then they run. Now imagine...
The comedy came from like their facade being broken.
Now imagine Kevin Hart being that guy, and you get 5 minutes of rambling back and forth between him and Chris Rock. That's the movie. So it is all of
5 minutes for like a 25-second scene.
Yeah, and here's a great example of the difference between the two films.
Mm-hmm.
They open up the coffin. Who's this? Looks at the body. It's just some other guy, some other white guy.
Well, we see the body and then who's this?
Okay, so you see the body. Okay, we the audience go, oh yeah, that's just some guy. And then he reacts, who's this? And then we look back and it's, who's this? And they're like, oh shit, we got the wrong one. In the American one, they open up the coffin and it's a Chinese guy.
Okay.
And you're like, okay.
Because with the British version, you know, we see the body and we, the audience, are thinking like, oh, okay, that must be, you know, someone important to him.
Yeah.
But then the who's this is a punchline of like, oh, it's unfamiliar to the main character.
And Matthew McFadyen delivers it with that understated. Chris Rock is Mr. Who's this? What are you doing? How could you screw this up? And it's like a whole back and forth because, you know, more talking means more comedy.
Yeah.
And so it's very much of that school. It's shaky cam, lots of shaky camera.
Is this an improvised or written comedy?
They do have direct riffs and lifts. From what it is to me is, and this is what I gathered. So Chris Rock saw this film in an art house cinema where there were very few people seeing it. And he said, this should be playing in multiplexes or cineplexes. It's like, people should see this. I know how people can see this. I'll make it. Remake it, but with me and my friends in it who will draw in an audience. Yeah, okay. And what I gather is he got the script for this and then punched it up to be more. Like, I can make it better. Like, if I reference Oprah in this moment here, or do this, or do this, or do this. So it very much falls into that trap we see in a lot of American comedies of this ilk, where they just, like, they think the comedy is just more talking. Where even if you did like a gag, the gag is now ruined because they keep going with it. They just don't stop. So
I was thinking that Ghostbusters 2016 complaint.
I rewatched a clip of it last night because my biggest question that I could not remember was Peter Dinklage is in both films. How is Peter Dinklage portraying the character in the American film? And the answer is, thankfully, he isn't playing it stupid or over the top. The sad thing to report is he does nothing. So what I mean by that is, so you have that scene where he's showing the photos, and he plays it very tenderly in the British film. He's very much like, this is a genuine moment, like, oh, this is a photo of me on the bus. Ooh, I'm so ugly. And it's real, it's raw, but it's still a little funny because we're discovering, along with our main character, oh, okay, I think I know what's going on here. But in the American one, it is just, he is dryly delivering lines. And then it's all Chris Rock. It's all about Chris Rock. Hey, Chris Rock is reacting. Chris Rock's saying things. Chris Rock is saying, like, just because my dad saw Showgirls with you doesn't mean he's gay. I saw Showgirls with my dad doesn't mean I'm... Like, it's all about Chris Rock. Mm-hmm. And Peter Dinklage is just there too. But here's another difference, is to even amplify that point more, Peter Dinklage is a device to make the comedy happen for everybody else instead of being allowed to be funny himself. I praised moments ago about the revelation of the father being gay by the son looking around the room and noticing all the gay objects. In this film, the American one, Chris Rock notices the men wrestling statue and he freaks out, and then he looks at Peter Dinklage, and Peter Dinklage is looking around the room, indicating things around the room to show Chris Rock.
Oh, right. Like, have you looked at this yet? Have you looked at this yet?
And then so Chris Rock is now the one who's getting more and more of the focus. While what I found funny in that British version was the fact that not only
he starts to go
Matthew McFadyen funny in it, but like then Peter Dinklage is also having a little journey too. And there's layers to it, but that is how I would describe the American version. It is this film with added chunks to it and more of a focus on the lead man being funny all the time.
I was going to say with this film, and it's really great that Matthew McFadden was your favorite character in it. I could almost see a lot of some people, watching this film and thinking that, this is like the thankless role of the film. He has to be the straight man who takes everything seriously, and it helps to facilitate characters, but not necessarily like a favorite part.
But sometimes the straight man is the one you like.
Yeah, but that's
their function is very much appreciated.
But that's what I'm saying. With this Chris Rock performance, it sounds like, oh no, we are absolutely not doing that.
No, and it has to be. Even if he is the straight man, he still has to have gags because it's always about gags. It's always about some pop culture reference or some ha 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 line. Not even witty. Just. You didn't expect that to come out of my mouth right now?
You mentioned the Showgirls thing before and the Oprah thing. I'm like, oh man, pop culture reference. And even though I was not thinking about it at all, this film's missing them, it really kind of does drive home that this film didn't rely on pop culture references.
No, it relied on the characters and the narrative.
It mentioned, the London buses, but
that's just culture.
Barely anything, yeah.
Yeah, and some minor cultural references. I'm sure that the place that the dad and Peter Dinklage go to, that street or whatever, is a gay area.
Probably a telling thing, yeah.
But for us Australians, we don't know necessarily, but you can already gather that from all the other clues.
There are so many things happening there that it's already coming across.
Now, are you ready for the pin to be taken out of Love, Wedding, Repeat?
Yeah, sure. I have no idea where this is going. They both exist. Wow.
When we covered Love, Wedding, Repeat, I looked up who wrote the film, and I remarked, my God, this is from the guy who wrote Death at a Funeral. I really love Death at a Funeral.
Oh, that Dean something?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Same writer. And now that you know that, doesn't this all make sense? A lot of the elements from this get not just recycled, but it's almost a photocopy of a photocopy.
I even mentioned earlier this episode, wasn't there the slimy friend in that as well?
Mm-hmm. And you also have just so many other elements like that.
The wedding date was obscuring me, but yeah.
So Love, Wedding, Repeat is a film written by this guy, and what I put it down to, not only is it just the lack of creativity, because sadly, I have to say I should, rather, is this writer is a one-trick pony.
Mm-hmm.
He did Death at a Funeral. Then he did a film called A Few Best Men.
I saw that. That's another one that I thought of, but yeah, there you go.
And then he did Love, Wedding, Repeat. They're all the same movie, but diminishing returns.
See, when I was coming into this episode, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll compare it to The Wedding Date and Love, Wedding, Repeat because we've done those.
Cover them.
I also thought of A Few Best Men, but we haven't done it, so I was like, no need to think about
Diminishing returns and
all three films, same writer.
Mm-hmm, and different directors. And I don't want to speak ill of those other directors, but you really feel the lack of that oomph factor that you get here from Frank Oz. It's not even as if Frank Oz is being showy in his presentation, but just the music, the shot compositions, the editing, the cuts, the direction of the actors. You can tell that this is a very, very experienced director who's worked in comedies before, but also isn't afraid to go that extra mile beyond just being if you didn't know this was Frank Oz, would you have even assumed that this was an American director of this very British film?
No, I didn't. So when I finished the film and it said directed by Frank Oz, I'm like, oh yeah, it was directed by him. Is he British?
No.
Then I went on Wikipedia and it's no, he's American.
So there we are. The Love, Wedding, Repeat stuff did actually enter my mind because when I was watching, I was thinking about Love, Wedding, Repeat. Then I was like, oh, that's right, same writer. And it actually did minorly impact my pleasure of Death at a Funeral, looking at the elements going, they're going to reuse that, and that, and that, and that, and they're going to make it worse. I thought about the comedy Friends, and it made me think about in the film Love, Wedding, Repeat, they have the Irish friend of the chick who's played by, I can't remember that actress's name, Aisling B., or Aisling B., who's very funny. And the thing that I criticized that movie for was she never really got to be funny in that movie. Like, they didn't give her anything. And I'm like, wasn't it? It's so weird that they got a really funny person to not do any funny
It was something like
remarks.
That, yeah.
And it made me think about this movie where it's like different characters, but it made me think about the Ewan Bremner character where he can be very funny. And in this movie, he's not really. He's one of the least funny characters in it.
Is that the slimy friend?
Yeah, and it's not without lack of trying. He's very much trying to be using the things I love about him, but yeah, I
mean, he sold the sliminess, I guess. But,
I loved his suit. The more you got to look at like the stitching on his suit,
when you have that reverse shot of like the niece like outside the bathroom and like he's like leaning against the wall and you like see how skinny he is and diagonal. It's like, oh man,
you can see why in Trainspotting he played the most addicted heroin addict character.
I can believe that now.
Yeah. So that is Death at a Funeral. That's all I have to say. I do recommend this. I still think it holds up quite nicely. It still is a fun time. It has the right amount of sentimentality mixed with the laugh out loud, over the top, raunchy humor, but it never goes too overboard where it becomes gratuitous, and really solid performances.
Yeah. And one last thing, I really liked the touch of like in the ending credits when it showed the actors that they chose to use like bloopers.
Yes, but only very quick ones.
Quick ones, yeah. It really gave the sense that like, oh, the film is having fun, the people making it were having fun. And it was even funny to see like the characters that weren't corpsing, like Uncle Alfie and all that.
Yeah, or even the stern father didn't really corpse that much. It was somebody else off camera said something and he reacted like, okay. And that was mainly it. So it's like the two most, I guess, aggressive characters you could say in the movie were the actors who didn't get to corpse as often.
We also had like the dissonance of like, you know, we keep talking about how Peter Dinklage was really dramatic, and then he does like a silly, like almost Carlton dance.
Yeah, that was great to see. But that is Death at a Funeral. Recommend
I do.
Both of us. Yeah. So next episode is a Listening People's suggestion. This is a suggestion from somebody we're hoping will come on next week to be a guest.
Ooh.
So the film is Charlie's Angels, the McG film starring Drew Barrymore.
Okay.
And Lucy Liu and
I think I've seen it.
Cameron Diaz, of course, our favorite Queen, Cameron Diaz.
Yes, I like Cameron Diaz.
Ooh, yes, and it has Crispin Glover in it and Tim Curry. So it's a real winner of a film. Charlie's Angels, recommended by our friend Sam Noonan.
Oh, Sam Noonan.
Recommending a film. He has recommended a film for us previously that's been on it's like at the top of our list.
Something like Hydro?
Yeah, and I asked him, well, are you going to do that movie? And he's too afraid to talk to us about that movie because he's so bad. He's like...
I remember his comment on our Facebook page was some... I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something foreboding. Like this is something that an experience for him.
So I've been trying to convince him to come on to do that, but he just won't do it. So I was like, I would like you to come on. So come on for something. So he gave me a few options. Charlie's Angels seemed the most appropriate. So that is it, Charlie's Angels. Make sure for yourself, listening people, to give that a view in the meantime. You can find us on the internet, on Facebook and Twitter, Spit and Polish Presents. We post on there. You can drop us a message. You can email us over at where, Bartek?
That email is spitandpolished@gmail.com.
That is all we have got for you. If you've not rated and reviewed the podcast, you can do so. Just lift up that hand, drag it over to whatever device allows you to click on things, whether it is your mouse or your phone, and just head on over to your podcast hosting site of choice and just drop us a rating and review. We would love to hear from you, what you think of the show, and just get your support as well.
And if you somehow have some, device that's operated by voice, you don't have to be as smart Alec and tell us like, oh, I don't have to drag my hand anywhere. I just have to say it. Like, you can skip that step. Just do that, okay?
Okay, just do that, please.
Please.
But until next time, listening people, remember to be kind to each other, and that, wow. I don't know what to say.
Just don't say it again, bark it.
I don't know what to say, Bartek.